When the eccentric uncle's will names a timid librarian as the sole heir, she uncovers a hidden map that leads not to riches, but to a subterranean chamber where an ancient, horrifying secret is just beginning to wake up. The smell of mothballs and old parchment still clung to the air in the study, a ghostly residue of Uncle Silas. I stood by the mahogany desk, the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, nervously adjusting his tie under the weight of the silence. I'd flown halfway across the country for this, not for the money, though a share of Silas's considerable estate certainly wouldn't hurt, but for closure. Silas had been more of a distant, eccentric uncle than a relative, but his death left a gaping, dusty hole in our family tree. My cousin Mark fidgeted by the door. Mark was Silas's only direct descendant, a man whose entire personality seemed molded by his anticipation of this inheritance. He was handsome in a tailored, entitled sort of way, the kind of man who wore Italian leather loafers to a funeral. He'd been certain he was getting everything. Silas had always praised his sharp business mind, his ambition. Mark had practically been planning his yacht purchase for the last decade. I, on the other hand, was merely there to witness the reading, a courtesy attendee. I was a librarian, for crying out loud. My biggest financial worry was whether the rare manuscript section needed dehumidifying. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the quiet room. We are gathered today to execute the final will and testament of Silas Alistair Thorne, dated October the 15th of last year. He tapped the thick envelope resting on the blotter. As you both know, Mr. Thorne was a man of meticulous, if somewhat convoluted planning. He stipulated that the reading must occur exactly 3 weeks after his passing, which brings us to today. Mark actually leaned forward, practically vibrating. Just get to the assets, Henderson. The farm, the portfolio, it's all mine, correct? We discussed this. Henderson gave a tight professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. The assets are substantial, Mr. Thorne. But Mr. Thorne also amended the primary beneficiary status shortly before his final hospitalization. He cited a need for the estate to be managed by someone who understood the true value of legacy over mere ledger sheets. My heart gave a strange little lurch. I looked away, fiddling with the silver letter opener on the desk, trying to project an air of utter disinterest. Legacy. That sounded exactly like something Silas would say before cutting someone off. And who, precisely, understands these ledger sheets better than I do? Mark's voice had lost its smooth veneer, cracking with sudden, sharp anxiety. I managed his private investments for years. You can't just... Henderson held up a hand, silencing him with practiced ease. The primary beneficiary, the entirety of the estate, the real estate, the stocks, the offshore accounts, the rare book collection, and the controlling interest in Thorne Industries is bequeathed to a single named individual. The entirety. The air in the study suddenly felt thick, difficult to draw into the lungs. Mark stared, his mouth slightly ajar, his tailored confidence visibly dissolving. I braced myself for the inevitable moment when Henderson would name some obscure foundation or a long-lost secret child. Henderson took a deep, steadying breath, his eyes flicking towards me for a split second before settling back on Mark. The sole beneficiary of the estate of Silas Alistair Thorne is... He paused, a dramatic beat that felt agonizingly long. Eleanor Vance. Mark didn't shout. He didn't scream. He let out a sound that was worse, a choked, high-pitched gasp, like air being violently sucked from a vacuum. He stumbled back a step, knocking a small, ornate globe off its stand. It hit the thick Persian rug with a muffled thud. "My inheritance is gone?" Mark finally yelled, the shock giving way to absolute raw fury. He spun toward me, his face a mask of disbelief and venom. Her? The librarian? What the hell is she inheriting? A lifetime supply of overdue notices? You can't let this happen, Henderson. This is fraud. She was never even mentioned. I slowly straightened up, my own shock rapidly crystallizing into a cold, hard realization. Eleanor Vance. That was me. I looked down at my simple cardigan, then back at the furious, ruined face of my cousin. "It's impossible," Mark spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She was just the cleanup girl. She organized his dusty old papers once a year. Why would he leave everything to her? Henderson, you have to tell me what she's inheriting that's worth more than a few antique paperweights." Mr. Henderson, pale but holding his ground, simply slid a second, much thinner folder across the desk toward me. "Miss Vance," Mr. Thorne was quite specific. "The bulk of the estate is detailed in the primary document. However, he left a codicil, meant only to be opened after the primary reading, perhaps to satisfy any immediate questions about the motive." I hesitantly picked up the slim folder. It was sealed with a dollop of black wax, stamped with an unfamiliar crest, a coiled serpent clutching a key. My hands were shaking now. I broke the seal, the crisp sound echoing in the room. Inside was not a legal document, but a single, heavily annotated map detailing the grounds of Silas's estate. At the very center, marked with a bright red X and Silas's familiar, spidery handwriting, were the words, "The True Vault, for Eleanor alone." Mark, seeing the map, lunged across the desk, his eyes wide with predatory hunger. "The True Vault? What vault? There's no vault. Silas didn't have a vault. Give me that!" Mark's desperate grab knocked the map from my grasp. It fluttered toward the floor, but instead of hitting the rug, it caught the edge of the desk and snagged on the corner of a massive, leather-bound volume, one of Silas's ancient ledgers that I recognized immediately as the inventory of his private, uncatalogued collection. The impact sent the ledger tumbling open, its brittle pages splaying out. The map drifted down, landing face up near Mark's Italian loafers. He didn't even spare it a glance. His attention was entirely fixed on the ledger, which had fallen open to a page filled not with book titles, but with cryptic diagrams and sequences of numbers. "What is this rubbish?" Mark snarled, trying to slam the heavy book shut. But it resisted, snagged open by something tucked between the pages. I scrambled to retrieve the map, snatching it up before Mark could ruin the delicate paper. The X was undeniably over the neglected south wing of the manor, a part of the property that had been boarded up since before I was born, rumored to have been Silas's father's private study, or perhaps a mausoleum, depending on which local gossip you believed. "It's an inheritance, Mark," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline pumping through me. "Silas left it to me. You need to accept that." Mark didn't look at me. He was now wrestling with the open ledger, his face pale with a mixture of rage and dawning, avaricious curiosity. "This isn't an inventory. Look at these symbols, Eleanor. They're not Dewey Decimal Codes. They're coordinates, or something worse." He jabbed a finger at a sequence of symbols that looked vaguely alchemical. He was obsessed with secrecy. "You think he leaves this to the librarian? You don't even know what you've inherited." Mr. Henderson, who had been frozen by the bookshelves, finally found his voice sounding strained. Mr. Thorne explicitly stated that the estate's assets were clearly detailed in the primary document. This ledger, this must be something entirely separate, perhaps personal effects not subject to probate. "Personal effects?" Mark laughed, a harsh, broken sound. He finally managed to tear free whatever was wedged in the ledger's spine. It wasn't paper. It was a small, tarnished silver cylinder, no bigger than my thumb. He held it up, his eyes gleaming with manic hope. "This feels heavy. This feels valuable. This is what he hid from the rest of the will." As Mark turned the cylinder over in his hand, the afternoon light caught a minuscule inscription on its side. It was too small to read clearly, but even from across the desk, I could make out the unmistakable shape of the coiled serpent and key. The same crest stamped on the wax seal of the codicil. "That's not part of the estate," I whispered, recognizing the emblem from a vague memory of Silas showing me an old family ring years ago. "That belonged to his mother." Mark ignored me completely, focused solely on the artifact. He found a nearly invisible seam on the cylinder and twisted. With a faint metallic hiss, the cap sprang open. Instead of jewels or cash, a tightly rolled piece of aged vellum slid out, landing softly on the desk blotter. Mark snatched it up immediately, his breathing ragged. He unrolled the vellum hastily, scanning the contents. His expression shifted from predatory excitement to utter, frozen horror. He read the short message once, twice, then dropped the vellum as if it had burned him. It fluttered down next to the silver cylinder. "No," Mark breathed out, shaking his head violently. "No, he promised. He said this was the only way to protect it. If this is true, then you have no idea what you just stepped into, Eleanor. This changes everything about the inheritance. This changes what the house is worth." Mr. Henderson stepped forward cautiously, peering over Mark's shoulder at the vellum. He adjusted his glasses, read the few lines of hurried script, and his face went instantly ashen. He backed away from the desk so fast he tripped over his own briefcase. "Good heavens," Henderson muttered, clutching his chest. "Mr. Thorne never mentioned. He swore it was contained." Mark looked at me, his anger momentarily replaced by a chilling, desperate plea. "Eleanor, listen to me. Whatever you think you're inheriting, the books, the houses, the stocks, that's pocket change. This is why he hid the real key in the codicil. This is why he put you in charge. You have to let me manage this, right now, before anyone else finds out you possess this information." He gestured wildly at the fallen vellum, which contained just one line. "The Thorne legacy is not wealth, but guardianship. The serpent sleeps beneath the roots of the oldest oak. Do not wake it without the proper key." Before I could even formulate a response, before I could ask what serpent, what key, or what exactly was sleeping beneath the roots of an oak tree, the heavy oak door to the study shuddered violently. A loud, insistent hammering echoed through the quiet house, followed by a voice, deep, gravelly, and utterly devoid of patience, bellowing from the hallway. "Mr. Henderson, I know Silas Thorne is dead. Open this door. The contract is void if the primary custodian is not immediately identified. I am here to reclaim what is rightfully mine, and I have the authorization papers to prove it." The hammering stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of heavy boots scraping on the hardwood floor of the hallway just outside the study door. Mark visibly shrank, glancing wildly between the door and the evidence scattered on the desk. The incriminating vellum, the map marked with the X, and the silver cylinder that had unleashed this chaos. "Who is that?" I demanded, grabbing the map and stuffing it into my cardigan pocket. The chill emanating from that single piece of paper seemed to sink right into my bones. Mr. Henderson, recovering slightly, wiped his brow with a trembling hand. That sounds like Mr. Silas's chief legal consultant from Geneva, Mr. Richter. He handles the international holdings. He was not supposed to be informed until after the reading was complete and the final executor was established. "The contract is void?" Mark hissed, snatching up the silver cylinder and jamming it back into his own jacket pocket. "What contract? If he has papers that void Silas's will, then I should have been the beneficiary. Silas never told me about any other contracts." "It's irrelevant now, Mark," I snapped, finally taking charge. The librarian in me, used to imposing order on chaos, was kicking in. If Richter thinks the will is void, he's coming for control, and he doesn't care who Silas named. He just wants the assets. The door handle rattled violently. Richter was clearly not interested in polite negotiation. "We can't let him in here." I looked around the study, seeking escape routes. The windows were tall, leaded glass, beautiful, but probably locked and too high to jump from safely. Henderson pointed a shaky finger toward a dark, ornate tapestry hanging on the far wall, a depiction of some ancient Norse myth, heavy with interwoven thread. "That conceals a secondary door. Silas told me once, years ago, it leads down to the old wine cellar. It might connect to the grounds if you're quick. I never thought he'd actually—" Mark, motivated by pure self-preservation and the sudden realization that the true inheritance might be slipping through his fingers to a lawyer he didn't trust, didn't hesitate. He lunged for the tapestry, ripping the heavy fabric aside to reveal a recessed, iron-studded wooden door. "Get behind me!" Mark commanded, surprising me with the sudden shift in dominance. He wrestled with the heavy iron bolt securing the hidden door. "Henderson, you stay here and stall him. Tell him you need time to verify the documents." "Stall him? He's a trained negotiator, Mr. Thorne. I can't possibly—" Henderson squeaked. A deafening crash echoed from the hallway. Richter wasn't knocking anymore. He was forcing entry. Splintering wood sounded agonizingly close. Mark gave the bolt one final heave. With a screech of ancient metal, the lock gave way. He pulled the door open, revealing a steep flight of stone steps leading down into absolute blackness, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and deep, undisturbed cold. "Go! Now, Eleanor!" Mark shoved me toward the opening. I scrambled through the doorway just as the main study door burst inward with a tremendous sound of splintering oak. In the brief sliver of light from the study, I saw the silhouette of a massive man, Richter, standing over the terrified lawyer. Richter's voice boomed, laced with metallic authority. "Where is the beneficiary? Where is the new custodian of the Thorne estate?" Mark dove through the opening behind me, slamming the heavy iron door shut with all his remaining strength. The blow resonated through the stone as he fumbled blindly for the internal bolt. We tumbled down the first few slick steps into the suffocating dark. Mark found the bolt and slid it home just as Richter's shoulder slammed against the outside of the door with the force of a battering ram. The ancient wood groaned in protest, but held. "He won't keep that shut long," I whispered, pulling the map out again, trying to use the faint light filtering from the cracks around the door frame. "The cellar connects to the grounds, you said? Which way?" "I don't know," Mark admitted, panic seizing him again now that the immediate threat was momentarily delayed. "Silas only told me the existence of a hidden exit. He never mapped it for me. I only cared about the liquid assets." Another impact shook the door, harder this time. The sound of metal scraping against metal suggested Richter was already looking for a way to bypass the lock entirely. "Then we move fast," I said, pulling out my phone, uselessly, as there was no signal down here. I clicked on the small flashlight feature, casting a weak, trembling beam across the rough-hewn stone walls. The beam illuminated not dusty wine racks, but something far stranger. The walls were lined with shallow alcoves, and in each alcove rested a smooth, dark sphere, pulsing with the faintest, almost imperceptible inner luminescence. "What are these?" Mark whispered, utterly unnerved. I didn't answer. My flashlight beam swept across the floor. The stone steps ended abruptly, opening into a vast, cavernous space. The rumored wine cellar, perhaps, or maybe something much older. In the center of the dirt floor, beneath a natural archway of exposed bedrock, was a single massive oak root system, gnarly and thicker than a car, exactly matching the description on the map. And in the center of that root system, just as the map indicated, was a roughly hewn stone slab, clearly placed there to cover something. Suddenly, the light on the stone slab shifted. The faint bluish glow from the spheres lining the walls seemed to react to the presence of the slab, brightening intensely. A low subsonic hum began to vibrate through the soles of my shoes, a sound that felt more like a pressure change than an audible noise. From directly beneath the stone slab, a deep, wet click echoed through the chamber, followed by a sound that was undeniably organic, something vast shifting in its centuries-long sleep. The serpent, I realized with paralyzing horror, was waking up. The low hum intensified, vibrating through the bedrock so powerfully that dust began to rain down from the cavern's ceiling. The spheres lining the walls, which moments ago had provided only a dim, eerie light, now glowed with a fierce, internal blue fire, illuminating the chamber in stark, terrifying detail. Mark saw it too. His face, already strained with panic, went utterly slack as he stared at the ancient oak root system. The massive stone slab covering the ground directly beneath it was not just vibrating, it was visibly rising, inch by agonizing inch, pushed upward by an unseen, colossal pressure from below. "The serpent sleeps beneath the roots," I gasped, clutching the map so tightly my knuckles were white. Silas wasn't talking about a metaphor, was he? Mark didn't answer. He took 2 shuffling steps backward, tripping over a stray piece of fallen mortar. He was no longer focused on the inheritance or the threat from Richter outside. He was focused entirely on the slow, inexorable emergence from the earth. The stone slab finally tilted onto its edge with a deafening grinding sound, revealing a pit of absolute blackness below, darker than the surrounding shadow, and smelling overwhelmingly of ozone and stagnant water. And then the sound changed. The wet shifting was replaced by a slow, heavy uncoiling. "We need to go now," I screamed, finally breaking free of my paralysis. I turned to run back toward the iron door, but it was too late. The hammering from Richter had stopped. The silence was far more menacing. From the study above us, a new sound drifted down through the thin wood of the hidden door, the distinct metallic snick of a sophisticated locking mechanism being bypassed, not forced. Richter hadn't broken the lock. He had picked it. "He's coming down the stairs," Mark yelled, his voice thin with terror. He scrambled past me, abandoning any thought of strategy, pure instinct driving him toward the opposite end of the chamber where the bedrock archway seemed to lead into a further passage. I glanced back. A sliver of light appeared at the top of the stone staircase as Richter stepped through the doorway, his silhouette large and imposing, his eyes already adjusting to the otherworldly glow of the blue spheres. He paused, taking in the scene. The rising slab, the deep pit, and the 2 of us trapped between him and whatever was emerging from the ground. Richter didn't seem surprised by the spectacle. He didn't even spare a look for the glowing spheres. His eyes locked immediately onto the massive oak root system and the uncovered pit. "The custodian identified," Richter's voice echoed, calm and dangerously precise, entirely unlike the blustering man outside. "Excellent. You saved me the trouble, Eleanor Vance, but this chamber is now sealed by prior agreement." He reached up to the recessed doorway where he had entered and produced a small matte black device. With a quiet electronic thunk, a heavy steel plate slid down from the ceiling archway near the stairs, sealing off our exit completely. We were trapped in the cavern with the thing rising from the pit, and Richter was now positioned between us and the only other visible exit leading deeper into the earth. "Silas Thorne was in breach of contract regarding the containment," Richter continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the pit. "The primary directive supersedes the will. The estate is now under the jurisdiction of the council. I am here to secure the asset." From the pit, the uncoiling stopped. There was a moment of suspended silence, broken only by the rapid, shallow breaths of Mark and myself. Then, a sound of immense weight being lifted, followed by a single massive hiss that carried the stench of sulfur. Richter didn't flinch. He raised his hands, palms facing the pit, as if expecting a handshake. "Show yourself, Guardian. Your containment has been breached by the rightful inheritor, but the liability remains with the council. We offer the terms of resealing now." Before he could finish, a single massive coil, thicker than any tree trunk, erupted from the pit. It was covered in scales the color of obsidian and wet granite. It rose higher than Richter, higher than the archway, blocking the last vestiges of light from the stairs. It didn't have eyes in the traditional sense, but where eyes should have been, there were twin indentations glowing with the same intense blue light as the spheres. The creature didn't roar or strike. It simply tilted its immense head, its gaze, or whatever passed for it, settling not on the intruder who had called it, but on the person holding the key, Mark, frozen solid near the deeper passage, still clutching the silver cylinder. Then the creature moved. It didn't strike Richter. Instead, with terrifying speed and precision, the immense head swung, the jaws opening far wider than seemed physically possible, revealing rows of teeth like sharpened quartz. It didn't target Mark, the man holding the physical key. It struck past him, lunging directly for the one person who held the map, me, the true inheritor of the guardianship, just as the faint light from the blue spheres in the chamber extinguished all at once, plunging us into absolute crushing darkness. The sudden plunge into absolute darkness was disorienting, thicker, and more suffocating than any cellar night. The only sound was the monstrous whoosh of displaced air as the serpent, or guardian or whatever it was, lunged. I didn't scream. Decades of sorting fragile, priceless materials had taught me that panic shattered what needed careful handling. Instinct took over. I threw myself sideways, diving toward the rough stone floor, using the momentum to roll away from the presumed path of the strike. I heard the sickening thud of something massive hitting stone where I had been a heartbeat before, followed by a wet, frustrated bellow that shook the very foundations of the earth around us. Eleanor! Mark's voice was a terrified squeak from somewhere near the deeper passage. He hadn't moved. He was still rooted to the spot where the creature had initially targeted him. Richter, however, reacted instantly, professionally. The moment the light died, a harsh, focused beam sprang to life, a tactical flashlight strapped to his wrist. He wasn't blinded. He was prepared. His beam swept across the chamber, momentarily catching the serpent's colossal wet snout inches from my face. "The terms are rejected!" Richter roared, stepping forward, positioning himself directly between me and the Guardian. He didn't waste time shouting at me to run. He addressed the monster. "Containment breach confirmed. Initiating Protocol Omega." Richter didn't carry a weapon in the traditional sense, but his black-clad hands moved with impossible speed, tapping several points on the wrist device. A high-pitched, almost inaudible frequency pierced the air, designed, I assumed, to disrupt the creature's specialized senses. The serpent recoiled, its massive form convulsing. The blue glow that had been emanating from its non-existent eyes flickered violently as if overloaded. This was Silas's real protection, not a lock, but an incapacitating frequency that only engaged once the containment was broken. This was my chance. I ignored Richter's battle with the beast and focused on the only piece of information that mattered, the map marked with the X, marking the true vault beneath the roots. The map wasn't just a key location, it was Silas's final instruction set. I fumbled in my pocket, pulling out the vellum slip that described the serpent. "Do not wake it without the proper key." "The silver cylinder." Mark had snatched it. "Mark, the cylinder! Give him the cylinder!" I yelled over the painful screech of the sonic frequency. Mark, finally jolted out of his paralysis by the sheer proximity of death, fumbled inside his jacket. He ripped out the silver tube, his hand trembling so violently he almost dropped it into the uncovered pit. "What do I do with it?" he shrieked. "The map shows the vault is under the roots. The key goes in the root system. Get the cylinder to the hole." Richter was losing ground. The serpent was adapting to the frequency, beginning to coil again, its massive bulk forcing Richter's flashlight beam wildly around the chamber. Richter was powerful, but he was fighting a force of nature designed to live in this specific, damp, subterranean prison. Mark, spurred by the imminent threat engulfing the man who was momentarily blocking his way to the deeper passage, finally moved. He sprinted toward the open pit, slipping on the damp earth. He reached the lip of the opening, leaning precariously over the abyss, where the Guardian's massive head was now whipping around, momentarily distracted by Richter's failing sonic attack. With a desperate cry, Mark hurled the silver cylinder into the darkness of the pit. It didn't clatter against rock. Instead, there was a distinct, heavy clunk, followed by a sharp, mechanical click from deep within the earth, the sound of a key finding its lock, but directed down into the creature's lair, not up into the vault. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The serpent's enraged momentum ceased mid-strike. The terrifying blue light in its sockets winked out. The colossal body went suddenly, horrifyingly slack, collapsing back into the pit with a sound like a collapsing cave. Dust, rock, and a wave of stagnant air washed over us. Richter immediately powered down his sonic device. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by Mark's hyperventilating gasps near the edge of the hole. What just happened?" Richter asked, his voice rough, lowering his flashlight beam slowly toward the pit. I stood up, brushing the dirt off my cardigan, my mind racing to catch up to the physical reality. The silver cylinder wasn't the key to the vault, Mr. Richter. It was the emergency kill switch, or the recontainment mechanism. Silas's will stated I was the custodian of the legacy. The legacy wasn't the money. It was this ancient thing he was guarding. I looked at the map in my hand again. The X marked the vault, but the vault was clearly not the pit. The pit was the danger. Richter walked over to me, his professional demeanor slowly returning, though his face was streaked with sweat and grime. He looked at the map, then back at the now silent pit. The primary asset is secured. Protocol Omega succeeded in temporary sedation. Miss Vance, you have proven yourself the correct custodian, not by seeking the wealth, but by understanding the threat. I apologize for my abrupt entry. The Council needs to know the status of the Guardian immediately. He paused, looking pointedly at Mark, who was slowly crawling away from the edge of the pit. And we need to discuss the disposal of Mr. Thorne's remaining, highly flammable assets, including his greedy relative. I looked down at the map again. The vault was still marked under the roots. I looked at the still-closed steel plate blocking the stairs. We were sealed in with a temporarily sedated biological containment unit and a corporate operative who wanted Mark gone. I took a deep breath, realizing that inheriting Silas Thorne's estate meant inheriting his eternal job. The vault is still there, Mr. Richter, and the inheritance hasn't been fully processed. Before we discuss disposal, you and I are going to go through every single item Silas listed in the primary documents. Because if Silas set up a mechanism to keep that thing asleep, I need to know what he used the actual inheritance money to build on top of it. I looked toward the far end of the cavern where Mark was desperately trying to find a path deeper into the earth, away from both Richter and the pit. And Mr. Richter, I added, turning my focus entirely to the map and the knowledge that the true work had just begun. You need to help me figure out how to open that steel door, because I still haven't seen the real